The new companion will be gone before the coal runs out, the Duke of Wycliffe told his butler, loudly enough for Eleanor Harrow to hear. She stood in the servants' hall with rain dripping from her sleeves and the housekeeper's ring of keys lying on the table between them. Mrs. Brindle had refused to surrender them. 3 footmen watched. 2 kitchen maids pretended not to. Eleanor did not argue. She lifted the pantry ledger, held it in one hand, then picked up the nearest flour sack. £56, she asked. That is what we paid for, said the housekeeper. Eleanor cut the cord. The sack struck the scale at 49. From the split seam rolled a small brass token stamped with the number 17, a token belonging not to any mill in the county, but to the naval victualling yards where Eleanor's father had taught her to count supplies. The Duke's expression hardened. You have been here 6 minutes. Miss Harrow. Yes. Your Grace, she said, and someone has already stolen 7 pounds of flour from you. Then the kitchen bell rang from a room that had been locked for 11 years. Every servant in the hall went still. The sound came again, one sharp metallic pull, followed by the faint vibration of wire inside the walls. Mrs. Brindle crossed herself. One of the kitchen maids dropped a spoon. The Duke did not look toward the passage from which the bell had rung. His attention remained fixed on Eleanor, as though her arrival and the impossible summons were parts of the same offence. Which room? She asked. No room that concerns you, he said. The butler, Mr. Valle, lowered his eyes. The east morning room. Mrs. Brindle seized the keys from the table. The wire is old. Mice disturb such things. Mice, pull downward, Eleanor said. Bell wires move sideways through the walls. The housekeeper's mouth tightened. The Duke stepped between Eleanor and the passage. He was a tall man, severe in black despite the hour, with the controlled stillness of someone who believed anger became dangerous only when displayed. You were engaged as my aunt's companion, he said. You will read to her, walk with her when she is able, and refrain from investigating my walls. I was also told to oversee her meals. You were told nothing about the household stores. No. Your Grace. That is why I was surprised to find the pantry ledger waiting beside my trunk. That made Mr. Vale look up. The book had not merely been left on the table. It had been placed squarely atop Eleanor's travelling case, open to the week's deliveries, with the flour entry underlined twice. Someone had wanted her to see it. The Duke glanced at the ledger, then at Mrs. Brindle. I placed it there, the housekeeper said quickly. A mistake. Eleanor looked at the woman's hands. The right thumb bore a crescent of black polish from handling iron keys. The left was clean. Yet the 2 lines beneath the flour entry had been drawn in fresh red pencil, the sort clerks carried behind one ear. Mrs. Brindle carried no pencil. The brass token lay against Eleanor's palm, colder than the rainwater in her gloves. Her father had supervised naval stores at Portsmouth until illness cost him his position. He had taught her that government tokens never travelled loose. They were issued in numbered batches, collected against cargo, and returned before payment. A token found inside a country flour sack meant either stolen government grain or a sack deliberately resewn around something that did not belong there. Neither possibility ended with 7 missing pounds. A young scullery maid edged toward the spilled flour with a brush. Leave it, Eleanor said. Mrs. Brindle snapped. Clean it at once. The girl froze between them. Eleanor crouched before the sack. The cord had been tied with a dockman's hitch rather than a miller's knot. Along the inner seam ran a faint line of red dust. Not brick. Not rust. Dyed flour. Her father had once shown her the same substance in a seized cargo. Unscrupulous suppliers marked diverted sacks with coloured meal so their confederates could recognise them without opening the loads. The Duke watched her touch the dust. You appear determined to make a drama of household waste. Eleanor rose. £7 from one sack is not waste. And an old brass counter proves nothing. Not by itself. His gaze sharpened at the qualification. Before he could answer, the locked room bell rang a third time. This time Eleanor heard something beneath it, 3 quick taps from inside the wall. Not the irregular scratch of an animal. A signal, Mrs. Brindle moved toward the passage. But the Duke caught the ring of keys before she could conceal it in her apron. Which one opens the east morning room? None of them. Your Grace. The key was lost after her Grace died. The words changed him. Only slightly. But Eleanor saw the Duke's fingers close around the iron ring until the knuckles whitened. So the room belonged to the dead Duchess, or had been sealed because of her. Mr. Val, he said. Send for the locksmith. The butler hesitated. The nearest is in Ashcombe. Your Grace. He cannot arrive before tomorrow. Then the room remains closed. Eleanor looked down at the pantry ledger. The last 3 flour deliveries bore the same neat signature, but the pressure of the pen changed halfway through each surname. Someone had traced the steward's hand slowly, then completed it with confidence. The bell had rung only after she exposed the underweight sack. Someone inside the house had seen her do it. Someone who knew the locked room would draw the Duke's attention away from the stores. Eleanor closed the ledger. The missing flour was not the crime. It was bait, and she had just announced to the entire household that she could recognise the trap. Eleanor slipped the brass token into her pocket before anyone could decide it belonged elsewhere. She left the flour undisturbed, marked the torn sack with a strip of blue thread from her sewing case, and followed Mr. Clear. Vale upstairs to meet the woman whose companionship was supposed to occupy all her waking hours. The Dowager Lady Wycliffe was not the Duke's aunt by blood, but his late mother's elder sister. A narrow, silver-haired woman confined to a wheeled chair by a damaged hip, and possessed of eyes that seemed perfectly capable of walking wherever she could not. You found the pantry before you found me. Lady Wycliffe said, The pantry found me, milady. And my nephew, he found fault. He generally does. It saves him the danger of finding grief. Eleanor placed the older woman's medicine tray beside the fire. One bottle smelled faintly of bitter orange. Another had been stoppered so poorly that half its spirit had evaporated. She checked the labels before measuring the prescribed drops. Lady Wycliffe watched every movement. You have done this before. My father's hands became unsteady near the end. He was a physician, a naval storekeeper. Lady Wycliffe's eyebrows rose. Eleanor explained only what was necessary. Her father had inspected grain, salt meat, lamp oil, sailcloth, medicines, and every other necessity capable of being made cheaper by a dishonest supplier, after fever weakened him. Eleanor had copied his tallies, tested weights, compared seals, and learned that theft rarely began with an empty warehouse. It began with a pound missing from every sack and a clerk certain no one would count. She did not explain that his dismissal had left debts. nor that her wages at Wycliffe Hall were meant to keep her younger brother Thomas apprenticed to a respectable instrument maker in London. If Eleanor lost this position, his next quarterly payment would fail. Thomas would return to the lodging house where their father had died, and the last useful thing Eleanor had arranged for him would collapse. Lady Wycliffe accepted the medicine without protest. "My nephew believes you will leave. I cannot afford to." A useful distinction. By noon, Eleanor understood how little authority a companion possessed, and how much disorder could hide behind that fact. She might enter Lady Wycliffe's rooms, the library, the south garden, and the family pew. She might not order servants, inspect stores, question accounts, or request keys. Mrs. Brindle made each boundary clear with the satisfaction of a jailer reading prison rules. The servants, however, had already begun watching Eleanor. In the back passage she found the young scullery maid from the pantry scrubbing red dust from the flagstones with bare, cracked hands. "What is your name, Clara?" "Miss." "Who told you to clean the flour, Mrs.?" "Brindle." "I told you to leave it." Clara stared at the floor. "Mrs. Brindle said you would be gone soon." "Miss." There was no insolence in it, only fear sharpened by experience. Eleanor crouched beside her. The water in the bucket had turned pink. She dipped one finger into it, then smelled the residue. Meadow rote, perhaps, mixed through coarse meal. The same cheap dye was used to mark rejected naval provisions before destruction. "Did you see who placed the ledger on my trunk?" Clara's scrubbing slowed. Before she could answer, Mrs. Brindle appeared at the end of the passage. "Clara has work." "So do I," Eleanor said. "Lady Wycliffe requires fresh bread with her supper. The household bread is sufficient. It contains flour from the opened sack." "Mrs." Brindle's face remained calm. "The flour has been used for 3 days. No one is ill." Eleanor thought of the bell, the forged entry, and the haste with which the evidence was being washed away. "I will purchase a loaf in the village." With whose authority? With my own money. That cost Eleanor 1 shilling and 4 pence, more than she had intended to spend on herself for the week. She walked to the village rather than request a carriage, returned with bread for Lady Wycliffe, and divided the remaining loaf among Clara and the 2 youngest kitchen maids. By evening, every servant knew she had paid for it herself. Mr. Vale found her after supper in the narrow passage outside the pantry. "You should not have done that," he said quietly. "Fed them, shown, Mrs. Brindle, that they may come to you." His warning held no hostility. "You saw who left the ledger?" Eleanor said. The butler looked toward the servants' stairs. "I saw no one." It was too careful an answer. He handed her a folded scrap of paper and walked away before she could open it. Inside was a list of the previous month's flour deliveries, copied from the gate book. 4 carts had been admitted to Wycliffe Hall. The pantry ledger recorded 6. Beneath the figures, in Mr. Vale's precise hand, was one final line. "The carts marked 17 never passed through the gate." Eleanor read Mr. Vale's warning twice, folded it along its original crease, and tucked it inside her cuff. The carts marked 17 never passed through the gate. That meant the false deliveries were not arriving under cover of darkness or through some neglected entrance. They existed only on paper. Yet flour bearing the same number had appeared in the pantry. Someone was bringing inferior goods into Wycliffe Hall under legitimate entries. then charging the estate again for cargo that had never existed. She needed to know which sacks were real before Mrs. Brindle ordered the remaining marks scrubbed away. Ad dam. Eleanor accompanied Lady Wycliffe into the south garden, where the older woman took precisely one circuit of the gravel path before pain forced her back into her chair. Eleanor pushed slowly, listening as the wheels clicked over the joints between stones. "You are thinking loudly," Lady Wycliffe said. "I was not aware," thought made a sound. "Yours does. It sounds like a clerk sharpening a knife." Eleanor bent close enough that the footman behind them could not hear. "May I ask who pays the household suppliers? My nephew signs the quarterly warrants. The steward prepares them." "And who receives the goods, Mrs. Brindle?" "Unless the delivery concerns the stables or cellars." Lady Wycliffe turned her head. "You have found more than 7 pounds of missing flour. I have found 6 recorded deliveries, and only 4 carts. Then you have found arithmetic. Proof is another matter." Eleanor looked toward the service yard beyond the clipped yew hedge. "I need permission to inspect your breakfast stores." "You have permission to ensure I am not poisoned, starved, or fed bread fit for cavalry horses. Use whichever description causes the least screaming." The next delivery arrived before noon. Eleanor heard the wheels from Lady Wycliffe's sitting room and reached the service yard as a narrow farm cart came through the arch. A miller's boy sat on the bench. No more than 16. His cap pulled low. Behind him lay 8 flour sacks marked with a black crown and the initials W. M. Mrs. Brindle was already waiting with a receipt book. "You are not required here." "Miss Harrow, Lady Wycliffe wishes to know the weight of the flour used for her table. The mill guarantees every sack. Then weighing them will cost us nothing but time." The boy's eyes moved quickly from Mrs. Brindle to Eleanor. He looked frightened before anyone had accused him of anything. Mrs. Brindle signed the receipt. Eleanor placed her hand over the page before the sand could be scattered across the wet ink. "The sacks first." The housekeeper's expression sharpened. "Remove your hand." A man spoke from the archway. "What is the delay?" He was thick-set, carefully dressed, and carried a silver-headed cane he did not need. His coat was the dark green of a country gentleman, but the ring of keys at his waist belonged to a servant entrusted with more doors than any gentleman ought to require. "Mrs. Brindle stepped back at once. "Miss Harrow has decided to inspect the delivery." "Mr. Rook." So this was the steward. "Mr. Rook regarded Eleanor with mild amusement. His Grace's new companion. Lady Wycliffe's companion. A distinction of enormous importance. I am sure." His voice was pleasant. His gaze was not. It moved once to the flour scale, once to the receipt beneath Eleanor's hand, and finally to the blue thread still tied around the opened sack near the pantry door. He had noticed her mark. Eleanor turned to the miller's boy. "What weight did you load 56 pounds each?" "Miss." "Did you load them yourself?" The boy swallowed. "Yes." "Miss." "Mr." Rook tapped his cane against the stones. "The young lady is not a magistrate." "Samuel." The use of the boy's name was not kindness. It was a reminder. Eleanor pointed to the first sack. "Put it on the scale." Samuel obeyed. 56 pounds. The second weighed the same. So did the third. On the fourth, Eleanor noticed that the black crown had blurred along one edge. The marking had been applied to damp cloth. She turned the sack over. Its lower seam was sewn with pale flax thread, while the other sacks used coarse brown hemp. "Open this one." Mrs. Brindle protested. Mr. Rook did not. That troubled Eleanor more. Samuel cut the cord. The flour inside was clean, dry, and white. No redust. No hidden token. Nothing that justified the steward's patience. Eleanor plunged the wooden sampling scoop deeper. Halfway down, it struck something hard. She drew out a small oval of polished horn, pierced at one end and notched 3 times along the edge. It was an ordinary warehouse tally, the sort tied to a batch of goods until payment was confirmed. On one side was scratched the letter W, on the other was the number 4. Samuel stared at it. Mr. Rook's pleasant expression did not alter. Our meal token, hardly a hanging offence. It is not from this mill. Samuel said before fear could stop him. Silence settled over the yard. The boy went pale. Eleanor held the tally between 2 fingers. How do you know our tallies are square? Miss, ash wood. Master Wilkes burns his mark. He never scratches it. Mr. Rook stepped closer. Children often invent details when they wish to appear useful. Eleanor examined the horn under the daylight. A thin residue clung inside the lowest notch-knot flour, but dark blue wax, the same shade used to seal the Duke's supply warrants. She slipped the tally into her pocket beside the brass token. Mr. Rook's gaze followed the movement. Household property should remain in the household. So should household money. For the first time, the pleasantness left his face. The Duke entered the yard before he could answer. His eyes passed over the opened sack, the scale, and the gathered servants. What has Miss Harrow disrupted now, Mr.? Rook turned smoothly toward him. Nothing of consequence. Your Grace, a nervous delivery boy, an old token, and a companion determined to mistake disorder for conspiracy. Eleanor looked at Samuel. The boy was trembling. But he had told the truth in front of the man who controlled whether his family's mill kept the Duke's account. She could not reward that courage by retreating. 4 carts entered your gate last month. She told the Duke. Your estate paid for 6. Today a sack from the legitimate mill contained a tally belonging somewhere else, stained with the wax used on your warrants. The Duke's attention shifted to Mr. Rook. The steward did not look surprised. That was Eleanor's answer. A man falsely accused might show outrage. An innocent steward might demand the records. Mr. Rook merely watched her pocket, calculating how quickly he could take back what she had found. The missing deliveries were not clerical errors. Someone had built a second route through Wycliffe Hall's accounts. And Eleanor had just shown its keeper that she could see the road. The Duke did not answer at once. He crossed the yard and held out his hand. The tally. Miss Harrow. Eleanor placed the oval of horn in his palm, but kept the brass token marked 17 in her pocket. 2 unexplained objects might suggest a pattern, surrendered together. They might also disappear into the steward's custody before she understood what connected them. The Duke rubbed his thumb across the blue wax caught in the notch. Why would one of my seals touch a warehouse tally? A question for the accounts. Eleanor said, Mr. Rook gave a patient sigh. Or for any clerk who reused a scrap of wax. Your Grace, I have warned the suppliers repeatedly about careless packing. Miss Harrow has found evidence of precisely the negligence I have been attempting to correct. Samuel looked up in disbelief. The steward continued before the boy could speak. I shall suspend Wilkes Mill until the matter is examined. Meanwhile, We should secure the delivery books and question the lad privately. The Duke glanced toward him. You knew there had been irregularities, minor discrepancies. I did not wish to trouble you before I had facts. It was an elegant theft. In 3 sentences, Rook transformed Eleanor's discovery into proof of his own vigilance and made Samuel responsible for explaining it. Eleanor saw the boy's face drain of colour. He should not be questioned alone, she said. Rook smiled. You mistake concern for authority. No, I recognize fear. Samuel's hands were clenched so tightly that flour had settled into the lines of his knuckles. He was not afraid of being caught in a lie. He was afraid of the man who knew his name. The Duke looked from Eleanor to the boy. Samuel, did Mr. Rook instruct you to place that tally in the sack? No. Your Grace. Did anyone? No. Sir, I never saw it before. Rook spread one hand. There. A mystery. Certainly. But hardly an accusation. Eleanor could have produced Mr. Val's note. She could have revealed the false deliveries and the number 17 before everyone in the yard. But Rook already knew she had noticed too much. If she exposed the gate discrepancy now, he would alter the books before she could compare them to the original warrants. A half-built account was only an invitation to destroy the missing figures. The boy should return to the mill, she said, with the unopened sacks. Mrs. Brindle protested. We require flour. Then purchase it elsewhere until the source is verified. Rook's cane struck the stones once, and place a household of 60 at the mercy of a companion's suspicions. Lady Wycliffe's voice came from beneath the archway. The household survived your judgment for 7 years. Mr. Rook, it may endure hers for 1 afternoon. Mr. Vale stood behind her chair, expressionless, except for the smallest movement at the corner of his mouth. The Duke turned. You should not be in the service yard, and you should not allow men to sell you imaginary carts. Yet here we both are. Lady Wycliffe motioned to Eleanor. Bring me the receipt. Eleanor lifted the unsigned page from the book and placed it across the older woman's knees. Lady Wycliffe examined the entry, then handed the pen to her nephew. Write that the delivery was refused pending inspection. The Duke looked at Eleanor rather than the paper. On Miss Harrow's recommendation, on your authority, Eleanor said. The distinction matters. Something changed in his expression. It was not warmth. It was recognition perhaps of the fact that she had offered him control when she might have embarrassed him by claiming it herself. He wrote the refusal and signed beneath it. Rook bowed. A prudent decision. Your Grace. I shall arrange an audit of every supplier. There it was again. Her warning. His remedy. The servants heard only that the steward would conduct an audit. Bisapa. The story would become that Mr. Rook had discovered a defective shipment and persuaded the Duke to reject it. Eleanor let him have the appearance of victory. For now, Samuel climbed onto the cart, but Rook caught the reins before the horse could turn. The mill may lose the Wycliffe account over this, he said quietly. Your master will wish to know whom to blame. The boy's eyes darted toward Eleanor. She stepped between the cart and the steward. The receipt records no fault against Samuel. The receipt is not the only record a man may keep. No, Eleanor said, but it is the one bearing the Duke's signature. Rook released the reins. The cost of defending Samuel became clear before the cart had cleared the arch. Mrs. Brindle removed Eleanor's name from the servants' tea list and informed the kitchen that Lady Wycliffe's companion would henceforth take her meals upstairs. It sounded like deference. In practice, it isolated her from the very people who knew which goods arrived, which disappeared, and who issued the orders. That evening, Eleanor found the small tray outside her room: cold mutton, dry bread, no candle. The Duke was waiting at the far end of the passage. He had removed his coat, and without its severe black lines he appeared less like a monument and more like a tired man who had forgotten how to stand at ease. You knew Rook was taking credit. He said, "Yes." You did not correct him, not while Samuel's livelihood was in his hand. The Duke came nearer. "You withheld something else in the yard." Eleanor's fingers rested against the brass token inside her pocket. "I withheld what I cannot yet prove. Most people in this house tell me too much and prove nothing. That may be why Mr. Rook finds it so easy to answer for everyone." The Duke looked toward the untouched tray. "Mrs. Brindle says you requested private meals. She lies efficiently." His mouth almost moved. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will inspect the household stores with me. With Mr. Rook present." No. For the first time since her arrival, the offer was not an order meant to confine her. It was access. Eleanor inclined her head. "Then tomorrow we may learn whether the shortages stop at flour." Below them, hidden by the turn of the servant's stair, Mr. Rook stood without moving until the Duke walked away. Then he entered Mrs. Brindle's room, closed the door, and said, "Miss Harrow must not remain in this house long enough to inspect anything." At 7 the next morning, Eleanor found the pantry door locked and Clara sitting on the floor beside it with blood on her apron. The girl's lower lip had split. She pressed a dishcloth against it and tried to rise when Eleanor approached. "Who struck you? I fell." "Miss," against whose hand Clara's eyes filled. But she looked toward Mrs. Brindle's room rather than answering. Eleanor helped her into the scullery and washed the cut with boiled water. The injury was small. The warning behind it was not. Someone had learned that Clara might speak about the ledger placed on Eleanor's trunk. "You owe me no confession," Eleanor said, "but you will not return to the kitchen alone today. I'll lose my place. Not before I lose mine." Clara gave a frightened laugh. Uncertain whether Eleanor was joking, Mr. Vale appeared in the doorway. His face remained composed, but his gaze rested on the blood-stained cloth. "His Grace is waiting in the household office. Please take Clara to Lady Wycliffe." The butler hesitated only once. "Mrs. Brindle will object." "Then she may object where Lady Wycliffe can hear her." Eleanor left them together and slipped her hand into her pocket as she crossed the passage. The brass token marked 17 remained there. Mr. Vale's note was no longer in her cuff. Before sleeping, she had copied its figures onto the blank margin of a devotional book and hidden the original beneath a loose strip of lining in Lady Wycliffe's medicine case. A prudent person did not keep every truth in one place. The Duke waited beside the household office with Mr. Rook at his shoulder. "You said the inspection would be private." Eleanor said, "I said Rook would not conduct it." The distinction was technically honest and practically useless. Rook held the ring of household keys. Mrs. Brindle reports that several are missing. Which keys? The plate room, the linen press, and His Grace's private writing cabinet. Eleanor looked at the Duke. "Were they missing yesterday?" "No." "And who held the ring overnight, Mrs. Brindle?" Rook answered. Eleanor did not look away from the Duke. "Then begin with her room." A muscle moved in his jaw. We will begin with the stores. They inspected the pantry first. The torn flour sack had vanished. So had the red-stained water Clara had used on the floor. Every remaining sack weighed precisely 56 pounds. And every receipt agreed with the stock. The cellar was equally perfect. Too perfect. Wine bottles stood in ordered rows. Lamp oil casks bore fresh brands. Coal bins had been filled to the chalk lines marked on the wall. Either Wycliffe Hall had repaired a month of shortages overnight, or someone had moved the evidence before dawn. Eleanor knelt beside the nearest oil cask. The wood was damp around the bung. "May I?" The Duke nodded. She loosened the stopper and dipped in a narrow glass rod. The liquid coating it was pale and thin. "This has been mixed with turpentine." Rook leaned on his cane. "A companion's opinion. My father rejected 200 gallons prepared in the same manner. It burns hotter, smokes heavily, and catches with almost no warning. Then we shall return it." "Who ordered it?" Rook opened the cellar book. "Miss Harrow did." The page bore her name. For a moment, Eleanor heard nothing but the slow drip of moisture from the stone ceiling. The order had been written in a hand resembling hers, not perfectly, but well enough to persuade anyone who had seen only her brief notes to Lady Wycliffe. Beneath it appeared an instruction to replace Wycliffe's regular oil with the cheaper mixture and charge the difference to household repairs. The Duke read it twice. "I did not write that." Rook turned the book toward the light. "The kitchen has several notes in the same hand. Written after I arrived, this order is dated 3 days ago. The date placed it on the morning of her journey. Before Eleanor had entered Wycliffe Hall, she saw the error instantly. The Duke did not. His attention had fixed on the signature. Rook closed the book. "Perhaps we should inspect Miss Harrow's room." "No," Eleanor said. The Duke's eyes lifted. "That refusal does not help you. It is not meant to help me. Clara is frightened. Mrs. Brindle's keys are supposedly missing. And Mr. Rook has just produced an order bearing my name. A search conducted by the people who accuse me proves only what they choose to place there." Rook's voice softened. "You concealed an object from His Grace yesterday." The Duke looked at her. Eleanor felt the brass edge against her palm through the fabric of her pocket. What object she could lie? It would buy minutes and cost everything afterward. A naval victualling token marked 17. It was sewn inside the first underweight flour sack. "You kept it, I kept it from Mr. Fay. Rook, you kept it from me." There was the wound between them, not yet trust. But the possibility of it, cut before it could strengthen. "I told you I had withheld what I could not prove, and decided alone what I was entitled to know in my own house." Rook lowered his gaze to conceal satisfaction. Eleanor took out the token and offered it to the Duke. He accepted it without touching her fingers. "Search the room," he said. "Mr. Vale and Lady Wycliffe were summoned as witnesses." Eleanor walked upstairs between the Duke and Rook, while servants gathered along the landings. No one spoke. Public suspicion required no announcement. It travelled through a house faster than smoke. "Mrs." Brindle opened Eleanor's door with the supposedly missing cabinet key. That alone should have stopped the search. Instead, the housekeeper crossed to the bed, lifted the mattress, and drew out a leather purse. 6 gold sovereigns spilled across the coverlet. Clara made a sound from Lady Wycliffe's chair. Rook picked up 1 coin and tested it between his teeth. Counterfeit. A dusting of red flour marked the purse seams. "Mrs." Brindle then opened Eleanor's workbox. Beneath the thread lay a small brass stamp bearing the Duke's crest and 3 folded supply warrants, each sealed in dark blue wax. The Duke's face closed. Eleanor understood the trap completely. The flower, the token, the forged orders, and the missing keys had all been arranged to make her appear not merely a thief, but the architect of the shortages she had exposed. "Send for the magistrate," Rook said. Lady Wycliffe struck the floor with her cane. "You will do no such thing." The Duke looked at Eleanor. Anger and doubt warring behind the restraint of his face. "Until this is examined, Miss Harrow will remain in her room. You are giving them time to alter the accounts, and you have given me reason not to trust your judgment. It was not imprisonment by law, but in a great house under a duke's command. The difference was thin. Mr. Vale was ordered to stand outside. Clara was sent below despite Eleanor's protest. The keys were removed. The counterfeit coins, forged warrants, brass stamp, and token went into Rook's evidence box. Only after the door closed did Eleanor remember the date on the false oil order. 3 days ago, she had still been 50 miles away. The forgery had not been prepared after she discovered the flower. It had been waiting for her before she arrived. Someone had known Lady Wycliffe would engage Eleanor, known her father's history with naval supplies, and built the accusation around skills she had never revealed inside Wycliffe Hall. From the courtyard came the grind of heavy wheels. Eleanor crossed to the window. A line of covered carts was entering through the main gate, each side painted with a black number 17, and the servants below were carrying the adulterated lamp oil toward the rooms being opened for Lady Wycliffe's midsummer reception. The first cask struck the service steps hard enough to loosen its bung. A pale stream ran across the stones, sharp with turpentine even through the closed window, and Eleanor saw a footman carry it inside beneath an armful of fresh lamp wicks. She seized the bell pull. No sound answered. The wire had been cut. "Mr. Vale," she hammered the door with both fists. "Do not let them light the east rooms," the butler answered from the passage. "His Grace ordered that you remain. The oil will burn too hot. The gallery hangings have been closed for 11 years. And the chimneys have not been tested. If those lamps are filled, one overturned glass could take the entire wing." Footsteps approached. The key turned. But it was the Duke who entered, not Mr. Vale. "You will explain why carts bearing the number on your token are now in my courtyard." "I cannot explain it from a locked room." "You can begin." Eleanor pointed toward the window. "The oil order bearing my name is dated before I arrived. Whoever prepared it knew who Lady Wycliffe had engaged, knew what my father taught me, and expected me to recognize the underweight flower. The token was not accidentally sewn into the sack. It was placed there so that when the rest was found in my room, every honest observation I made would become evidence against me." The Duke's face remained closed, but he looked toward the courtyard. Below, another cask disappeared through the service entrance. "You are asking me to believe that Rook designed an accusation before you entered this house. I am asking you to compare dates. I have compared handwriting. Then you have compared the part meant to deceive you." A bell began ringing below, not the impossible summons from the east morning room, but the rapid alarm of the servants' hall. Someone shouted. The Duke crossed to the window. Smoke was pushing from a narrow sash beneath the eastern roofline. Eleanor was already moving. He caught her arm. "You remain here. Then send someone who knows how the oil behaves. His grip tightened for 1 second. Tell me. Do not throw water on it. Send. Wool blankets. Wet sacking around the doors. Close every passage leading west. The fumes will run ahead of the flame, and the lamps must be carried out only if they are still cold. Another shout rose from the courtyard. A maid ran into the open with her apron burning. Mr. Vale knocked her down and smothered the flame beneath his coat. The Duke released Eleanor. Come. They reached the east gallery through smoke already thick enough to sting the eyes. Servants ran in both directions. Some with water buckets, others carrying chairs and rolled carpets. At the far end, orange light climbed behind a row of faded green curtains. Stop the water, Eleanor shouted. No one obeyed. The Duke stepped onto the gallery threshold. Set down every bucket. Do exactly as Miss Harrow says. The command cut through panic. For the first time, he had placed his authority behind her publicly. Eleanor pointed to the long runner, covering the centre of the floor. Roll it toward the fire. Do not lift it. Mr. Val. Send men to the stable for sand. Clara. Wet every blanket you can find, and bring them only as far as the west door. Clara stared at her. Mrs. Brindle sent me below. Then disobey her. The girl ran. A lamp burst behind the curtains. Burning oil spread across the polished floor in a bright, crawling sheet. One footman flung water before Eleanor could stop him. The flames leapt outward with a roar, driving everyone back. The Duke raised one arm before Eleanor's face as glass shattered against the wall. The room beyond. She said, What is in it? The morning room. The locked room. Yes. 3 taps sounded from behind the closed door. The same signal Eleanor had heard inside the wall. Someone was in there. The Duke crossed the burning strip before she could stop him. But the brass handle would not turn. Stand back, he ordered. He struck the door with his shoulder. It held. Eleanor caught the sleeve of a passing footman. Bring the iron poker from the library hearth. The fire had reached the lower edge of the curtains. Smoke folded downward from the ceiling. Eleanor tore a wool cover from a chair, soaked it in a water bucket, and wrapped it across the Duke's shoulders before he could object. You cannot command the door open, she said. Use the poker at the lock. He looked at her once, then nodded. The footman returned. The Duke drove the iron point between the lock plate and the jamb. Wood split. A second blow tore the screws free. The door opened inward. A man collapsed across the threshold. Mr. Vale and the Duke dragged him into the gallery, while Eleanor smothered the fire catching at his coat. He was thin, grey-faced, and dressed in the faded livery of a Wycliffe indoor servant. A length of bell wire had been wound around one wrist. Lady Wycliffe's voice came from behind the line of wet blankets. Bennet. The man's eyes opened. You know him? Eleanor asked. He was my sister's clerk. The older woman said. He vanished the week she died. The servants returned with sand. Under Eleanor's direction, they buried the burning oil, pulled down the curtains before the fire reached the cornice, and sealed the gallery doors with wet wool. The crisis narrowed from a consuming blaze to a blackened floor, ruined hangings, and smoke that would linger for weeks. The Duke had burned one hand breaking the morning room lock. He ignored it. Bennet lay against the wall, coughing soot. Eleanor knelt beside him and loosened his collar. Who shut you in there? His gaze moved through the smoke until it found Mr. Rook standing at the west end of the gallery. The steward's face showed horror, concern, and calculation in equal measure. Bennet gripped Eleanor's wrist. The carts, he whispered. 17 is not a supplier. What is it? His fingers tightened painfully. It is the room where they change the seals. Mr. Rook turned toward the stairs. The Duke saw him move. Close the doors, he ordered. But before the footman could obey, a second explosion sounded from beneath the house, and the entire eastern floor lurched under Eleanor's knees. The floor dropped no more than an inch, but the sound beneath it was deep enough to shake soot from the ceiling. Eleanor threw one arm over Bennet as the remaining lamps swung on their chains, and the Duke caught Lady Wycliffe's chair before it rolled toward the burned section of gallery. From below came the splintering crash of timber, followed by men shouting in the cellar passage. The oil stores, Eleanor said, not the casks we saw the chamber beneath them. The Duke turned to the footman. Val, keep everyone west of the main staircase. No flames below. Rook stays here. But Mr. Rook was no longer at the gallery doors. In the confusion after the blast, he had disappeared. The Duke's burned hand closed uselessly at his side. Eleanor saw the anger in his face, and, beneath it, the older instinct to command first and examine later. Do not send every man after him, she said. That may be what he wants. His gaze snapped to hers. He has fled, or gone to destroy whatever the explosion failed to reach. Bennet stirred against her knees. Room 17, he whispered, below the old laundry. The door has no number. 17 is inside. The Duke knelt, despite his injured hand. Why were you locked in the morning room? Bennet's eyes moved toward Lady Wycliffe. Her sister found the second seals. She asked me to copy the warrant book before she confronted anyone. Then she died. They said fever. Lady Wycliffe's face lost all colour, but her voice remained steady. My sister had been ill for 3 days. She was ill after she drank the cordial from the blue bottle. Bennet said, I saw Mrs. Brindle carry it. I accused her. Rook said I had stolen plate and would hang if I spoke. He kept me in cottages under false names, moving me whenever questions began. 3 nights ago they brought me back. They wanted to know where I hid the copies. Eleanor remembered the East Room bell, the 3 taps within the wall, and the ledger placed upon her trunk before her arrival. You rang for help. Bennet nodded. The wire passed behind the pantry. I heard voices. When Miss Harrow spoke of the token, I knew they had begun again. The locked room bell had not been a distraction arranged by Rook. It had been Bennet's only means of warning her. Someone else had placed the pantry ledger where she would see it, someone who wanted the fraud exposed but lacked the courage or freedom to speak openly. She looked at Mr. Pound. Val. He did not deny it. You put the ledger on my trunk. I found Bennet's name scratched beneath the East Room bellboard last winter. The butler said, I believed him dead. When the bell rang again, I thought someone might still be alive in that room. I did not know whom I could trust. So you tested me. I gave you a book. You found a theft before you had removed your wet gloves. There was no time to answer. Smoke rose through the cracks between the floorboards. The Duke ordered 2 men to carry Bennet to Lady Wycliffe's rooms, but Bennet caught Eleanor's sleeve. The copies are not in the morning room. I hid them where no steward would willingly look in the old laundry drain. Behind the 3rd iron grate, The Duke stood. "Show us." "He cannot walk," Eleanor said. "I can find it." "Not alone." The words came from the Duke with such force that both of them heard more than command in them. Eleanor looked at his blistered palm. "Your hand requires dressing. Lato, if the skin closes around dirt, you may lose the use of it. Then dress it while we walk." She almost refused from habit. Instead, she tore a clean strip from the lining of her undersleeve, wrapped his palm, and tied the knot with her teeth while he held a lantern taken from an unopened cabinet. The intimacy of the act unsettled her more than the fire had. His hand was large, steady despite the pain, and entirely obedient beneath hers. "You trusted my plan in the gallery," she said quietly. "After I confined you on forged evidence, that was not trust, it was necessity." And now he looked toward the blackened doors through which Rook had escaped. "Now I know necessity arrived sooner because I refused to believe you." It was not an apology. Not yet. But it contained the shape of one. They descended by the servants' stair with Mr. Bale and Amos, the head groom, behind them. The cellar passage had partially collapsed, where a false partition concealed a lower chamber. Splintered shelving lay across the stones. The air smelled of oil, wet mortar, and scorched wax. Behind the old laundry, they found an iron door without a number. Inside, painted on the wall in black tar, was a large 17. The room held a work table, seal moulds, blank warrants, discarded merchant stamps, and stacks of horn tallies. Eleanor set the brass token beside them. Its edge fitted a circular depression in the table, as neatly as a key entering a lock. The tokens identified false consignments. She said. A clerk inserted one into a legitimate sack. Then the goods were diverted or reduced. The number told the conspirators which warrants had been duplicated. The Duke lifted a metal mould bearing his crest. "My seal." "Not your seal. Its copy." She examined the blue wax pooled in a shallow pan. Dark grains of red flour clung to its rim. The flour was not merely a mark for stolen cargo. It was used in room 17, where sacks, tokens, and forged warrants were prepared together. Independent traces connected the pantry fraud to the copied seal. At the rear of the laundry drain, Eleanor found the third iron grate. The screws had rusted, but Amos forced them loose with a chisel. Behind it lay an oilskin packet containing 12 copied warrants, a list of payments, and a letter signed with a single initial B. Bennett had preserved the evidence, but water had blurred several pages, including the names of those receiving the stolen money. One line remained clear: final transfer before the midsummer reception. East deed chest to be removed under cover of the fire inspection. The Duke read it over her shoulder. The deed chest contains the tenant leases and boundary grants. If those disappear, forged replacements could transfer land, rents, or mineral rights without the tenants knowing until enforcement began. Eleanor opened another sheet. A map had been drawn in faint ink beneath the payment list. It marked the river meadows, the coal road, and a parcel labelled only with the letter S. This is larger than household theft. How much larger? Large enough to justify setting fire to your home. For a moment, the lantern light caught the exhaustion beneath the Duke's composure. My mother died while trying to stop this. Perhaps, Eleanor said. Bennett witnessed the cordial, But that is not yet proof of murder. He gave a bitter breath. You still protect truth from what I wish it to be. Someone must. His eyes met hers. Then remain that person. Even when the truth concerns me. The request was quieter than any declaration could have been. Eleanor felt the fragile bridge between them strengthen not because he admired her, but because he had asked her not to spare him. Mr. Vale called from the doorway. Your Grace. A fresh footprint marked the soot beside the work table. It had not been there when they entered. Narrow heel, silver nail at the edge. Mrs. Brindle's indoor shoes bore silver repairs. Eleanor turned toward the passage just as the laundry bell rang once above them. Then came Clara's scream. They ran upstairs and found Lady Wycliffe's rooms open. Bennet's chair overturned, and the oilskin packet gone from beneath the Duke's arm. On the carpet lay one wet copied warrant, deliberately left behind. Across it, written in fresh red flour, were 6 words: Miss Harrow has found what she needed. Clara lay behind Lady Wycliffe's dressing screen, conscious but unable to speak. A strip of linen had been tied across her mouth, and the back of her head was swelling where someone had struck her. Eleanor cut Clara's bonds while the Duke searched the adjoining rooms. Mr. Vale examined the overturned chair, then pointed to 2 parallel tracks in the carpet leading toward the concealed service door beside the wardrobe. The passage beyond descended to the servants' staircase. Whoever had taken Bennet had not needed to cross the public rooms at all. Clara clutched Eleanor's wrist and pointed toward the writing desk. One drawer stood open. Lady Wycliffe's medicine case had been emptied across the blotter, and the folded note Mr. Vale had given Eleanor was missing from beneath its lining. They had not merely stolen Bennet's packet. They had found the gate figures proving that 2 of the 6 flower carts never existed. They know everything we possess, Eleanor said, and now they know where we obtained it. The Duke returned with soot darkening his face. Rook has left the grounds. His horse is gone. Mrs. Brindle missing as well. Amos appeared in the doorway. Your Grace. Riders are coming up the South Drive. Constable with them. Eleanor felt the trap close before anyone spoke its name. Rook had sent for legal authority while the house burned. Knowing the rooms would be searched and the forged evidence found, he had not fled from exposure. He had gone to ensure his accusation reached the magistrate before theirs did. The Duke ordered Lady Wycliffe's rooms secured and carried Clara himself to the south parlour, where the servants could see that she lived. It was an act of mercy, but also a declaration. By lifting a scullery maid in his own arms, he told the entire household that the girl's injury mattered more than rank. Eleanor followed, carrying the single wet warrant left behind. Its ink had blurred, but the red words accusing her remained brutally clear. The magistrate entered within minutes, accompanied by Constable Hales, Mr. Rook, and Mrs. Brindle. The steward's coat was torn at one shoulder, and blood marked his temple. Mrs. Brindle supported him as though he had narrowly escaped murder. There she is, Rook said. Do not allow her near the evidence. The servants gathered along the walls. No invitation had been given, but no one wished to miss the moment in which the stranger who had disrupted the house was either vindicated or destroyed. Magistrate Say was a square-faced man with an old acquaintance's caution toward the Duke and a public official's suspicion of being ordered about. He listened first to Rook. Because Rook had reached him first, the steward claimed Eleanor had entered Wycliffe Hall under false pretences, planted naval tokens in provisions, forged supply orders in her own hand. stolen the Duke's private stamp, and attempted to destroy the East Wing when discovery became inevitable. He displayed the counterfeit sovereigns, the blue waxed warrants, and the brass crest stamp found in Eleanor's workbox. Then Mrs. Brindle produced a letter. It was addressed to a naval broker in Portsmouth and signed by Eleanor. The writer offered to sell Wycliffe supply seals and guarantee safe passage for falsely recorded cargo. Eleanor read the first line and knew immediately that the letter was false. She also knew why others would believe it. The hand imitated hers closely. The naval language reflected knowledge she had openly admitted, and the paper bore the watermark of a stationer her father had once used. Someone had researched her before she arrived. "Where was this found?" she asked. "In your room," Mrs. Brindle said. "Inside the lining of your travelling trunk." "Who searched it?" "The constable." "In my presence." Rook answered, "That was the cleverness of the second search. The first evidence had been found by household enemies. This letter had been discovered by lawful authority after Rook summoned him. Its custody appeared clean because the contamination had occurred before the constable entered." Magistrate Say turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, did Miss Harrow conceal a number token from you?" "She did." "Did objects bearing your seal appear among her possessions?" "They did." "And did a fire begin after an order, bearing her name, introduced adulterated oil into the East Rooms?" The Duke's burned hand tightened at his side. "Yes." Each truthful answer strengthened the lie. Eleanor felt the servant's faith shift around her. Not all at once, and not completely, but enough. A maid lowered her eyes. One footman stepped away from the wall as though distance might protect him from association. Rook had built his case from facts Eleanor herself had uncovered, turning her competence into motive and her caution into concealment. Magistrate Say faced her. "Until these matters are examined, you must come with the constable." Lady Wycliffe struck her cane against the floor. "She saved this house today." "That may be so, milady. It does not answer the evidence." The Duke stepped between Eleanor and Constable Hales. "She remains under my protection." The magistrate's expression hardened. "Your protection cannot obstruct an inquiry." "Then conduct it here." The charges include attempted fraud, theft of estate instruments, and a fire that endangered 60 lives. And the chief accuser controlled the accounts, the keys, and the servants who found every convenient object. Rook placed a hand against his bloodied temple. "Your Grace is compromised by gratitude." Miss Harrow saved the gallery after arranging the danger. A rescuer appears indispensable when she first creates the need. The words struck the exact promise of Eleanor's rise and poisoned it. Every repaired shortage, every protected servant, every useful decision could now be recast as preparation for control. The Duke looked at the assembled household, then at the magistrate. "If you take her, you take my formal statement that I believe the evidence manipulated, that I authorized her investigation, and that I will answer publicly for preventing her removal until Clara and Bennett are found." The cost was immediate. A duke who resisted a magistrate over an unmarried companion invited scandal, political scrutiny, and the suggestion that judgment had been corrupted by intimacy. Eleanor saw that he understood all of it. "You cannot risk your name for mine," she said. "I already used my name to silence you," he answered. "I will use it now to ensure you are heard." Magistrate Say allowed Eleanor to remain until morning. Confined to the south parlour, under Constable Hales's watch, it was a narrow victory that felt like defeat. Rook left the room beside Mrs. Brindle, while servants watched him go as the injured loyal steward and Eleanor remain as the suspected saboteur. Only after the door closed did Eleanor examine the wet warrant again. The oilskin packet had been stolen. Yet this single page had been left deliberately. Red flour formed the accusation across its face. She tilted it toward the firelight. The letters had been made, not by writing with dyed meal, but by pressing damp paper against words already laid on another surface. The accusation appeared backward in the faint impression beneath the visible line. A transfer, like the copied seal. Eleanor remembered the blue wax in the horn tally's notch, the red flower around the mould in room 17, and the forged signature dated before her arrival. Rook believed every copy required an original. More importantly, he believed the original must still exist somewhere safe enough to reproduce again. She looked at the final surviving line of Bennett's warrant, where water had blurred the recipient's name but not the payment date. Tomorrow, the morning after the fire, was marked for the final transfer. Rook had not completed his plan. He had only removed the people capable of challenging the next transaction. He will use the original seal book tomorrow. Eleanor whispered. The Duke bent close. Where he believes no one can compare it to the copies. She folded the damp warrant carefully. We must let him think his accusation has succeeded. Then we must give him one public question he cannot answer without admitting knowledge only the forger could possess. At Daum, Eleanor asked Constable Hales to escort her to the great hall. Rook had expected her to hide behind the Duke's authority. Instead, she requested the magistrate, the household servants, the 4 legitimate suppliers, and every tenant whose lease was stored in the Eastede chest. Magistrate Say objected to turning an inquiry into a spectacle, but the Duke supported Eleanor only after she stated her condition plainly. You will not speak for me. Your Grace, you may order the doors guarded and the records produced. Nothing more. The words cost him. She saw it in the pause before he agreed. Mr. Vale sent Amos to Wilkes Mill with written protection for Samuel and his master. Clara remained with Lady Wycliffe under the care of 2 maids chosen by Eleanor, neither connected to Mrs. Brindle. The copied warrant from the south parlour was placed inside the magistrate's document case, sealed by Say himself. The counterfeit coins were counted in public. The brass token marked 17 and the horntally were laid separately on the long oak table. By 9, the hall was full. Rook entered last. Mrs. Brindle beside him. He had changed his torn coat and covered the cut on his temple with a clean bandage. He appeared calm, injured, and reluctant to accuse a posture more dangerous than open anger. Magistrate Say began with the evidence against Eleanor. Rook allowed him to finish before speaking. Miss Harrow wishes to confuse a simple matter, he said. She entered this house with specialized knowledge of naval fraud. Within hours, naval tokens appeared in our provisions. Soon afterward, forged warrants and counterfeit money were found among her belongings. Then a fire began under an order bearing her hand. He turned toward the servants. She made herself necessary by creating the very disasters she solved. A murmur moved through the hall. Eleanor waited until it died. Mr. Rook. When did you first learn my name? He smiled faintly. When Lady Wycliffe informed the household that a companion had been engaged. What date I do not recall. Lady Wycliffe spoke from her chair near the hearth. The letter arrived on the 12th of May. Eleanor faced the magistrate. The false oil order bearing my signature is dated the 9th. Rook did not look at the ledger. A clerk may have entered the date incorrectly. 3 days before anyone in this house was told I would come, Lady Wycliffe may have mentioned you earlier. She did not, Lady Wycliffe said. The first crack appeared not proof, but a timeline the accusation could not comfortably cross. Eleanor lifted the forged letter supposedly found inside her trunk. This paper bears the watermark of Dobson and Pike, the Portsmouth stationers my father used. When was it purchased? Rook spread his hands. How could I know you presented it as evidence of my intentions? Surely you examined it. I examined the writing. Not the paper, no. Eleanor turned the sheet toward the window. The watermark reads 1811. Dobson and Pike closed in 1812. I left Portsmouth 4 years later. Magistrate Say leaned forward. The letter was written on old paper. Eleanor continued. By someone who knew my father's profession, but not the date on which I began managing his correspondence. Rook's confidence did not break. Old paper can remain in a trunk for years. Yes, but this sheet was folded after the ink dried. The dust inside the lower fold is not Portsmouth dust. She touched the faint reddish line trapped in the crease. It is the same dyed meal used in room 17. Mrs. Brindle's eyes flicked toward Rook. Eleanor saw it. Now the coins. She asked Constable Hales to place 1 counterfeit sovereign on the scale. Its weight was wrong, as before. Then she requested an authentic coin from Magistrate Say. The difference was visible before the balance settled. These false coins were found in my room. Eleanor said, but the red flower lies inside the stitching of the purse. Not outside it. The purse was sewn around contaminated cloth. It was prepared in the same workshop where the forged warrants were made. Rook struck the floor with his cane. Prepared by her. Then tell us how I entered room 17. Silence. The iron door had no exterior number. Eleanor said. The black 17 was painted inside. Bennett alone told us what the room was called. Rook's gaze hardened at the missing clerk's name. Eleanor moved closer to the table. Yesterday, before Bennett spoke in the gallery, you called the brass token a mill counter. Later, when the magistrate arrived, you described it as part of a naval fraud. No one had told you it was naval. I heard Miss Harrow say so, in my locked room. With the door closed, his answer came too slowly. Mrs. Brindle stepped backward. Rook seized the attack before the room could understand the pause. This is theatre. Bennett is a thief and a fugitive. Miss Harrow has hidden him because his story supports hers. No, Eleanor said. You hid him because he copied the payment warrants. For the first time, Rook's restraint slipped. The copies prove nothing without the original seal book. The words entered the hall and seemed to remain suspended there. Eleanor had never mentioned a seal book. Neither had Bennett. The Duke's face went utterly still. Magistrate Say rose. Mr. Rook, how do you know such a book exists? Rook looked toward the eastern doors. That was the mistake Eleanor had planned for, but not the only one. She turned to Mr. Fairs. Val, bring in the deed chest. 2 footmen carried the iron-bound chest into the hall. Its lock was intact. Its hinges were not. Fresh screws gleamed against old blackened iron. Eleanor placed the damp copied warrant beside it. The final transfer was not meant to remove the chest, she said. It was meant to replace what lay inside. Rook lunged toward the table. Amos caught him before he reached the documents. Mrs. Brindle screamed and ran for the side passage. But but Samuel Wilkes stepped through it with his millmaster and blocked her escape. Behind them came Bennet, pale and supported between two tenants. In his hands was a narrow ledger wrapped in oilskin. Rook stopped struggling. Bennet placed the book before Magistrate Say, but did not open it. "The original seal register," he said. "Every lawful impression, every defect, every date." Eleanor looked at the Duke's copied crest stamp. Then, at the first sealed page of the register, one tiny flaw in the true seal would decide whether every warrant on the table was lawful or forged. Magistrate Say reached for the clasp and opened the seal register to its first preserved impression. The Duke's true crest showed a small defect beneath the left wing of the wyvern, a break no wider than a needle scratch. Formed years ago, when the original matrix had struck stone, it appeared on every lawful warrant in the register. It did not appear on the warrants found in Eleanor's workbox. Their wyvern was flawless. Rook had copied the design, but not the damage. Magistrate Sai examined the forged oil order next. Its seal was flawless too. So were the false flower accounts. The replacement leases found inside the deed chest, and the letter allegedly written by Eleanor to the Portsmouth broker. The room moved slowly from suspicion to understanding. These were all made from the same copied stamp. Eleanor said, "The stamp planted in my room." Rook stopped struggling against Amos. "You cannot prove who used it." "No," Eleanor agreed. "That is why you kept a seal book." Bennet opened the narrow ledger he had brought. Each page recorded a false warrant, its duplicate number, the supplier whose name had been borrowed, the goods removed, and the payment divided afterward. Beside the most recent entries appeared two initials, E, R, and Im, B. Edmund Rook, Margaret Brindle. Mrs. Brindle sank into the nearest chair. The ledger showed how the fraud had begun with small household goods flour, coal, lamp oil. Linen then expanded into rents and repairs. Legitimate deliveries entered through the gate. In room 17, selected sacks were reduced, resewn, and marked with red meal. A brass token identified the consignment whose paperwork would be duplicated. The original supplier was paid once. Wycliffe Hall was charged twice. The difference passed through accounts controlled by Rook. The non-existent carts explained the extra payments. The horn tallies connected the substituted goods to room 17. The red flower connected the workshop to the purse. The forged letter, and the copied warrants planted against Eleanor. The blue wax connected the warehouse tallies to the false seals, and the undamaged wyvern proved that none of those seals had come from the Duke's lawful matrix. "You researched Miss Harrow before she arrived," Magistrate Say said. Rook remained silent. "Mrs." Brindle began to cry. "He opened Lady Wycliffe's letters," she said. "He read the application before it was answered. He learned about her father from an old naval directory and said her knowledge would be useful. He meant to make her discover just enough." Eleanor understood the final shape of the trap. Rook had expected her to identify the underweight flour and the naval token. Her discovery would make the later evidence believable. Once forged warrants, counterfeit coins, and the copied stamp appeared in her room. Her expertise would become proof of authorship. He had not merely framed an innocent woman. He had designed the frame around her competence. "Why?" the Duke asked. Bennet placed the faded map from room 17 beside the replacement leases. The parcel marked S covered the river meadows and the old coal road. Beneath the surface lay a seam of coal surveyed privately 3 years earlier. The original tenant grants restricted mineral seizure and guaranteed compensation. The forged leases removed those protections. Rook intended to replace the deeds during the confusion of the midsummer preparations, then transfer the mining rights to a syndicate in which he held a concealed share. The tenants would lose their fields. Wycliffe would receive a fraction of the land's value. Rook would receive the rest. The fire had served two purposes: destroy room 17 and empty the east wing long enough to exchange the contents of the deed chest. Bennet's survival had threatened everything. Lady Wycliffe turned toward Mrs. Pound. "Brindle. And my sister, Mrs." Brindle's hands twisted in her skirts. She found the false seal mould. She meant to show his grace the next morning. "Mr. Rook told me to give her twice the sleeping cordial, so she would rest until he removed it." "Twice," Bennet said. "The blue bottle was nearly empty." "Mrs." Brindle looked at him with horror. "I did not know he had already dosed her wine." Rook's composure finally broke. She was ill. She might have died regardless. Only the guilty man knew the cordial had also been added to the wine. Magistrate Say heard it. So did everyone else. Rook was taken into custody for fraud, forgery, attempted destruction of evidence, unlawful confinement, and suspected murder. Mrs. Brindle was detained as his accomplice. Though her cooperation and Clara's testimony would determine the degree of her punishment, Bennet's old accusation was struck from the household record. Samuel's mill retained its contract. Clara was placed under Lady Wycliffe's personal protection and promoted from the scullery only after Eleanor asked the girl what work she wished to learn. Then the Duke faced the household. He did not stand above them on the dais. He came around the table and stopped beside Eleanor. "I accused Miss Harrow publicly," he said. "I confined her on evidence I had not examined with the care she repeatedly demanded. I allowed grief to become neglect, and neglect gave dishonest people power over every person who depended upon this house. No one moved. The fault is mine." He ordered every stolen rent recalculated and returned. Unpaid servants would receive their wages with interest from his private funds. Every false lease would be destroyed in the presence of the tenants and magistrate. The east wing fire damage would be repaired by tradesmen chosen through open accounts. Then he placed the household keys on the table before Eleanor. "I will not give these to you as a reward for saving what I failed to govern," he said, "nor will I ask you to remain because I need you." His burned hand rested beside the iron ring. "I offer you a salaried appointment as Comptroller of Wycliffe Hall, with authority over household purchasing, wages, stories, and audits. Your contract will be witnessed by Lady Wycliffe and Magistrate Say. You may dismiss any officer under your authority, including anyone appointed by me. You may resign without losing your wages or your residence." Eleanor looked at the keys. On her first morning, Mrs. Brindle had refused to surrender them. The Duke had predicted Eleanor would not last until the coal ran out. Now the entire household waited for her decision. "One condition," Eleanor said. The Duke's expression almost softened. "Narmadid. The servants' accounts will be open to the servants whose wages they record. No one should need a companion with a scale to discover whether he has been paid." "Agreed. And Clara chooses her own apprenticeship." "Agreed." Eleanor picked up the keys. By midsummer, she ran Wycliffe Hall, not as an invisible companion, not as a grateful dependent, and not as a woman borrowing a man's authority. Her name stood on the contract. Her salary entered an account no steward could touch. Thomas's apprenticeship was paid through the year, and every sack entering the pantry was weighed before the cart left the yard. The Duke did not ask for more until the East Gallery had reopened. One evening, Eleanor found him there beneath the restored bell wires. He held no ring, no marriage settlement, and no command. "I have learned," he said, "that wanting you to stay is not the same as having the right to ask it. You have the right to ask, and you have the right to refuse." "Yes." He offered his uninjured hand. "Then may I walk with you?" Eleanor looked at the man who had once barred her from his locked rooms, and now waited for permission to cross a gallery beside her. She placed her hand in his. "You may." Above them, the East morning room bell rang once, not as a warning, but because Clara was testing the repaired wire. The Duke glanced upward. Eleanor did not. She had already counted every bell in the house.